It started like any other Saturday morning. Coffee brewing, the dog barking at a squirrel outside, and my son Cameron half awake at the kitchen table. But that illusion of peace shattered the moment I opened the front door to find an envelope taped to it. The letterhead read Community Safety Enforcement Directive, a phrase that sounded official but felt deeply wrong. My heart sank as I scanned the contents. Violations, citations, and a demand that we appear before the Willowbrook Homeowners Association on suspicion of non-compliance with neighborhood codes. We hadn't violated anything. My lawn was trimmed, the fence was painted, and our mailbox wasn't crooked. But the letter wasn't about rules. It was about control. My wife, Sloane, stood behind me, reading over my shoulder, her expression hardening with every line. "They're targeting us," she said flatly. I nodded. We both knew this wasn't about grass height or mailbox color. It was about who we were, a military family, newcomers to a quiet suburban street with its own hidden hierarchy. And someone had decided we didn't belong. What they didn't know was who my wife really was. Commander Sloane Winslow, United States Navy Intelligence, 15 years of service, multiple overseas deployments, and a reputation for dismantling high-level threats. She may have been wearing yoga pants and sipping coffee now, but beneath that suburban disguise was a strategic mind capable of unraveling terrorist cells. And someone had just picked a fight with her family. We attended the HOA meeting the next evening, held in a pastel community center that smelled faintly of disinfectant and fake floral arrangements. The room was filled with folding chairs and judgment. At the front sat Cheryl Dunning, the self-declared guardian of the community, the HOA president with a permanent smirk and a clipboard that seemed more ceremonial than useful. She wore a tailored blazer 2 sizes too small and spoke with the tone of someone who believed their opinions were law. "Mr. and Mrs. Winslow," she began, not even trying to hide her disdain. "We've received several complaints about your property, and we take these matters seriously." "What complaints?" I asked. "Unreported guests, noise, suspicious activity, possible housing of undocumented persons," she replied smugly. Cameron's face turned pale. Sloane's eyes narrowed to slits. This wasn't about property violations. It was character assassination cloaked in policy. Cheryl had weaponized the HOA to target us, and she expected us to roll over. "You have no authority to accuse us of criminal behavior," Sloane said calmly. Cheryl leaned back, smug. "Oh, but I do. As part of our new community safety initiative, we're cooperating with federal agencies. I suggest you comply." That was the moment I saw it, the flicker in Sloane's eyes. That signaled she'd moved from passive observation to active threat assessment. Cheryl had no idea who she'd just challenged. The next week became a battle of attrition. Our mailbox was vandalized. We received anonymous notes. Cameron's car tires were slashed. Sloane installed a full surveillance system by sunrise. The next morning, every corner of our property was now monitored, every angle recorded. We didn't sleep much, but we documented everything. Then came the knock at our door. 2 local officers, polite but firm. "We've received a report that your property may be harboring illegal residents," one said. "Mind if we come in?" Sloane didn't flinch. "Do you have a warrant?" "No, ma'am, just a complaint." "Then you're not coming in." She handed them a folder labeled Harassment Documentation, Winslow Household. Inside were screenshots, photos, timestamps, and a summary of every suspicious incident targeting us. "You might want to read this before you act on baseless reports," she said. The officers exchanged glances. "Ma'am, where did you get this level of documentation?" "Naval intelligence," she said flatly. 15 years. This is child's play." They backed off, but the battle wasn't over. Cameron came home from campus one night looking shaken. "Mom, Dad, someone left this on my car." It was a note, just one sentence. "Some families don't belong here." Sloane took a photo of it before crumpling it in her fist. "We're escalating," she said. "I need to make a call." That night, she disappeared into her home office for hours. When she emerged, her face was calm to calm. "I reached out to some contacts," she said. "People who monitor domestic extremism." Cheryl's name came up. "She's been flagged before, and not just here." The next morning, she briefed me like I was a field officer. "We're not the first family. At least 3 others in other neighborhoods have reported harassment from someone matching Cheryl's description. Same tactics, same accusations, same outcome. Families driven out, houses sold cheap, HOA leadership taking control of properties. It's a pattern, and I'm going to expose it. She began building a dossier, background checks, financial records, social media activity, everything legally accessible. Sloane worked like she was on an op, because she was, and I watched, stunned, as my wife transformed our living room into an intelligence cell. 3 days later, she handed me a flash drive. "This," she said, "is enough to make someone very nervous, who everyone Cheryl's connected to." That evening, she called a contact from her Navy days, someone now working with federal civil rights enforcement. She didn't explain everything, just enough. Then she said the words I'll never forget. "You're going to want to see this." The response came fast. The next morning, a plain black SUV parked down the street. Out stepped a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone used to making hard decisions. "Agent Torres," she said, "FBI, Civil Rights Division. I understand you have information." Sloane handed over the flash drive, and our lives changed forever. "What's your background?" she asked clearly, recognizing that she was looking at work that went far beyond civilian capabilities. Sloane's smile was sharp as a blade. "Naval intelligence detective, 15 years of tracking actual threats to national security, which makes identifying suburban predators relatively straightforward." The silence that followed was deafening, as both officers processed the fact that Cheryl Dunning had just picked a fight with someone who specialized in dismantling criminal networks for a living. But the real bombshell came when Officer Bradley, who'd been quietly reviewing Morrison's folder, looked up with an expression of dawning horror. "Detective, I think we have a bigger problem here," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Mrs. Dunning isn't just filing false reports, she's been impersonating federal authority." He held up a document that made my blood run cold. "She's been telling targeted families that she has connections with immigration and customs enforcement, and at least 2 families have fled the area because they believed they were under federal investigation." The implications hit me like a freight train. Cheryl hadn't just been harassing people. She'd been committing federal crimes by impersonating government authority. Detective Morrison's radio crackled to life at that exact moment, and the voice that emerged sent chills down my spine. "All units, we have a domestic disturbance at 1247 Willowbrook. Doctor reports of an individual threatening neighbors with deportation and federal prosecution." Morrison and Bradley exchanged glances that told me everything I needed to know. Reign of Terror was finally crumbling, but she was escalating to dangerous new levels as her carefully constructed kingdom collapsed around her. "Mr. Winslow," Morrison said, her voice grim with determination, "I think we are going to need that documentation your wife compiled, because what started as a neighborhood complaint just became a federal investigation." As sirens began wailing in the distance, and more police vehicles raced toward Cheryl's house, I realized we were witnessing the moment when a suburban predator's victims finally had someone with the skills and authority to fight back. But the look on Sloane's face told me this was just the beginning, and Cheryl Dunning was about to discover what happened when you made the fatal mistake of targeting a military intelligence officer's family in a community she had decided to protect. The chaos at Cheryl's house escalated beyond anything our quiet neighborhood had ever witnessed. Through our living room window, I watched as 3 more police cars arrived, followed by what appeared to be federal agents in unmarked vehicles. That screamed government authority. Cheryl was in her front yard, screaming at anyone who would listen about her rights as a community protector, completely oblivious to the fact that her years of terrorizing families had finally caught up with her, in the most spectacular way possible. What I didn't expect was the call that came to our landline at exactly 2:47 p.m., a call that would reveal just how deep Cheryl's criminal activities went, and why my wife had been making mysterious phone calls since dawn. Cameron was pacing our kitchen like a caged animal, his college kid confidence finally cracking, under the pressure of realizing he'd become the target of what was apparently a federal investigation. "Dad, what if they believe her lies? What if this ruins my college career? What if the university finds out I'm somehow involved in a criminal case?" His voice was rising with each question, and I could see the same fear that had driven other families from our neighborhood beginning to take hold of my son. That's when Sloane walked into the room with her phone in hand, and an expression that I'd learned over 15 years of marriage meant she'd just received information that changed everything. "Cameron, sit down," she said, her voice carrying that calm authority that had probably steadied naval personnel during crisis situations around the world. I need to tell you both something that's going to sound unbelievable, but I promise you, we're not the victims here anymore. We are the solution." She placed her phone on our kitchen counter and activated the speaker function. Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI Civil Rights Division, came a crisp, professional voice that made my heart skip several beats. "Mrs. Winslow, we've been investigating Mrs. Dunning's activities for the past 8 months based on complaints from families across 3 different states. Your documentation has provided the missing pieces we needed to build a federal case." The room went dead silent as the implications of what we just heard sank in. Cheryl wasn't just a neighborhood bully. She was apparently part of a pattern that had attracted federal attention across multiple jurisdictions. Agent Torres continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a briefing to senior officials. "Mrs. Dunning has been operating what we believe is a systematic campaign of civil rights violations, targeting immigrant families and young adults using false claims of federal authority to intimidate victims into leaving their homes. Your neighborhood is actually the 4th community where we've documented this exact pattern of behavior." But then came the twist that knocked the wind out of me completely. "Mrs. Winslow, when you called our tip line yesterday and identified yourself as Commander Sloan Winslow, Naval Intelligence, it triggered an immediate review of your service record." Agent Torres paused, and I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. "Your clearance level and operational history flagged you as someone we could work with directly on this investigation. In fact, we'd like to formally request your assistance in documenting the full scope of Mrs. Dunning's criminal network." My wife hadn't just been protecting our family, she'd been conducting her own federal investigation and had apparently impressed the FBI enough to be recruited as an asset. Cameron's jaw dropped as he processed what he was hearing. "Mom, you're working with the FBI now?" he asked, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Sloane's smile was sharp as a military blade. "Cameron, I've been working with federal agencies for most of my adult life. The difference is that now I'm using those skills to protect my family and community instead of overseas assets." She pulled up something on her tablet that made my eyes widen. "Agent Torres, I'm sending you the complete surveillance package I compiled on Mrs. Dunning's activities, including evidence of coordination with at least 6 other individuals who appear to be operating similar schemes in neighboring communities." Scope of what my wife had uncovered in just 3 days was staggering. She'd identified a network of suburban vigilantes who'd been using false federal authority to terrorize immigrant families across the entire region, with Cheryl serving as what appeared to be a training coordinator for other would-be community dictators. Mrs. Dunning has been hosting monthly meetings in her basement, teaching other HOA members how to identify problem families and systematically drive them from their neighborhoods, Sloan explained, her voice taking on the clinical tone she probably used during intelligence briefings. "We're not dealing with one crazy neighbor. We're dealing with an organized hate group that's been operating under the cover of community protection for years." Agent Torres's voice crackled through our speaker with barely contained excitement. "Commander Winslow, this intelligence is exactly what we needed to move from individual complaints to a RICO investigation. We're talking about conspiracy charges, civil rights violations, and potentially hate crime enhancements that could put these people away for decades." The irony was almost too perfect. Cheryl had spent years destroying families by claiming federal authority, and now actual federal authority was about to destroy her entire network of suburban terrorists. 6 months after Cheryl Dunning's conviction, our lives hadn't just returned to normal, they had evolved into something we never imagined. The Winslow Protocol had become federal law, signed into action by the president himself. It mandated specialized civil rights task forces in every U.S. state, trained using Sloan's methodology. The Department of Justice named her liaison to the new Office of Community Defense Initiatives. My wife now held an active advisory role at the federal level, working side by side with lawmakers to ensure no other family would endure what we did. And yet, back home in Willowbrook, Sloan still helped organize neighborhood meetings. "Change isn't just national policy," she told a packed community center one night. "It's knowing your neighbor's name. It's making sure your HOA isn't a hammer looking for a nail." What came next cemented our story into history. One crisp morning, we received an invitation to the White House, not just to attend a press briefing, but to be honored in a private ceremony. We were ushered into the Roosevelt Room, where Sloan received the Presidential Medal of Civil Service, a rarely given award recognizing her contribution to domestic justice. "Commander Winslow," the president said, pinning the medal to her uniform. "You reminded us that the enemies of liberty don't always come from abroad. Sometimes they knock on our neighbors' doors." Cameron, dressed in a suit instead of his usual college hoodie, shook hands with the Secretary of Education. "We're introducing civil rights case studies into high school curriculums," she said, "and your story's the first chapter." Later that day, while touring the National Archives, we were stunned to find Sloan's original surveillance file labeled Exhibit 1 in United States v. Dunning, ETL, had been preserved in a permanent collection on modern civil rights enforcement. "I thought we were just trying to protect our home," I whispered. "You were," said the docent, eyes wide, "and you ended up protecting a generation." Back in Willowbrook, the Hendersons invited us over to celebrate their daughter's birthday. Their home, once Cheryl's fortress of fear, now overflowed with laughter. In the backyard, Cameron helped set up a waterslide while Sloan spoke with young mothers about school funding and community safety. A woman I didn't recognize approached me quietly. "I'm from Alabama," she said. "My sister was one of the families driven out by Cheryl's old network. She's coming back home next month because of what your family did." I didn't know what to say, only that we were beginning to understand the full scale of what had changed. That night, Sloan received a call from the FBI. "We've confirmed 8 more copycat networks dismantled," Agent Torres said. 3 were taken down using the Winslow Sting protocols. 1 was run by a former HOA president who's now facing federal indictment. I looked at my wife and saw that quiet determination in her eyes again. The same look she had the day Cheryl knocked on our door. The look of someone who wouldn't stop until the job was done. Then came Cameron's big announcement. He'd been accepted into a joint JDMPA program focusing on civil rights law and policy enforcement. "I want to do what Mom did," he said one evening, "but in courtrooms and Congress, we supported him, of course." But what came next surprised even us. He proposed an initiative, the Winslow Foundation. Its mission: to train community leaders, support targeted families, and document HOA abuse nationwide. With Sloan's backing and DOJ seat funding, the foundation launched its first pilot office in Atlanta within 90 days. I watched Cameron speak at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by press, community leaders, and the very families we'd once feared for. "This foundation exists because one family said no more," he said, "and now it's our turn to help thousands more say the same." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Back home that evening, Sloan and I sat together in quiet reflection. "We didn't just stop Cheryl," she said. "We stopped a movement of hate, and we built something better in its place." I reached for her hand. "We built a legacy." And as Willowbrook lit up with porch lights and laughter from homes once silenced by fear, we knew we hadn't just survived, we had created the blueprint for how communities, when armed with truth and courage, could defeat even the most insidious threats. The Winslow name, once just a family at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, was now etched into federal policy, community defense, and the hearts of families across the nation. "Mrs. Dunning," she called out, her voice carrying across our entire cul-de-sac, "you're under arrest for impersonating federal officers, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and wire fraud." The look of confusion that flickered across Cheryl's face was priceless. She genuinely couldn't understand why her usual police contacts weren't backing up her fake arrest operation. But the moment that made my heart sing with satisfaction came when Sloan emerged from our house, no longer hiding behind civilian clothes. She was wearing her full Naval Intelligence dress uniform, complete with ribbons that told the story of 15 years defending America from actual threats. Gone was the suburban housewife. In her place stood Commander Sloan Winslow, in all her military authority. "Mrs. Dunning," she said, her voice carrying the kind of command presence that made entire ship crews snap to attention. "I believe you wanted to see federal identification." The color drained from Cheryl's face. So fast I thought she might actually faint. Her fake federal agents took one look at Sloan's uniform and immediately began backing away, clearly recognizing real authority when they saw it. "Your Cheryl stammered, her voice cracking as the full scope of her miscalculation began to dawn on her. "Commander Sloan Winslow, United States Navy Intelligence," my wife said, pulling out her military ID with theatrical precision. "And you, Mrs. Dunning, have just committed multiple federal felonies while under FBI surveillance." That's when the freeze moment happened, the instant that would haunt Cheryl Dunning for the rest of her life. Her mouth fell open, her eyes went wide with terror, and she literally stopped moving for a full 10 seconds as her brain tried to process what she was seeing. The woman she thought was just a civilian target had turned out to be a career military intelligence officer, backed by the federal government and 15 years of experience dismantling threats. The freeze broke when Agent Torres stepped out of the black SUV, her FBI credentials clearly visible. "Mrs. Dunning, thank you for making our job so much easier," she said with professional satisfaction. Impersonating federal agents while under federal surveillance has to be the most spectacular self-incrimination I've witnessed in 20 years with the Bureau. She gestured toward the surveillance equipment that was suddenly visible in unmarked vehicles positioned around our neighborhood. "We have everything on tape, the fake warrants, the false federal authority claims, and most importantly, your coordination with a network of co-conspirators across 6 states. But the real bombshell came when Agent Martinez emerged from Cheryl's own house, carrying boxes of evidence. "Mrs. Dunning, we've just executed a federal search warrant on your residence," he announced loudly, ensuring the growing crowd of neighbors could hear. "In addition to extensive documentation of your harassment campaigns, we've discovered financial records showing payments from a domestic terrorist organization, training materials for targeting immigrant families, and communications with co-conspirators planning similar operations in 12 other communities." Our neighborhood. Karen had been running a regional hate crime syndicate from her suburban basement. The moment reached its crescendo when Cheryl finally found her voice, but instead of the confident authority she'd wielded for months, what came out was a pathetic whimper. "This isn't possible," she whispered, looking back and forth between Sloane's uniform and the FBI agents. "You're just neighbors. You're just a family." This was supposed to be simple. The desperation in her voice was almost pitiful as she realized that everything she'd built, every family she'd terrorized, every ounce of power she'd enjoyed was crumbling around her in the most public way possible. Sloane stepped closer to Cheryl with the deliberate precision of someone delivering a final tactical strike. "Mrs. Dunning, you made 2 critical errors in your intelligence assessment," she said, her voice cold and clinical. "First, you assumed your targets were powerless civilians without resources or connections. Second, you never considered that threatening a military family might activate federal protection protocols. You couldn't imagine in your worst nightmares." She gestured toward the federal agents, the surveillance equipment, and the gathering crowd of neighbors now watching their longtime tormentor face justice. "This isn't simple harassment anymore. This is a federal civil rights prosecution that's going to dismantle your entire network and send you to prison for the next 20 years. As Detective Morrison read Cheryl her rights and federal agents loaded boxes of evidence into their vehicles, I realized we were witnessing the complete destruction of a suburban predator who had finally picked the wrong family to terrorize. But more than that, I was watching my wife demonstrate why no one should ever threaten a military intelligence officer's family unless they're prepared for the kind of strategic annihilation that turns community bullies into federal case studies. The news coverage that followed Cheryl Dunning's sentencing transformed our quiet neighborhood into a national conversation. Overnight, Willowbrook Drive became synonymous with community justice and federal accountability. Local journalists, who once ignored our HOA complaints, were now camped outside, eager to interview anyone with a connection to the Winslow case. Sloane handled the attention with the same poise she'd used in Navy briefings, measured, firm, and deeply mission-driven. One of the earliest televised interviews aired on national news featured Sloane speaking directly to families across the country. "If you're being harassed by those who think they're untouchable, know that silence only protects them. Document everything. Trust the system but be willing to activate it, and never underestimate the power of a united community." The impact was immediate. Within 2 weeks, the Department of Justice reported a spike in whistleblower calls from HOAs across the nation. Sloane's protocol was already saving lives. Meanwhile, our home became a headquarters of sorts. Cameron's youth group expanded, offering workshops in local schools about civil rights, neighborhood unity, and how to recognize red flags in community governance. I caught myself more than once listening in awe as our once soft-spoken son taught others how to stand up to intimidation with legal confidence. The Chen family invited us for dinner one Friday night and shared something incredible. After we moved away. Mr. Chen said, "We didn't think we'd ever feel safe returning. But what you all did, it made us realize we weren't alone. We came back because this isn't Cheryl's neighborhood anymore. It's yours. It's all of ours." It was a sentiment echoed by others. The Martinez family told us they were starting a support network for immigrant families dealing with similar harassment. "We're calling it Families Forward," Mrs. Martinez explained, her eyes shining. "We want to help others rebuild their lives after living in fear." At a town hall organized by our mayor, Sloan presented on the Winslow Protocol. "This isn't just about law enforcement," she told the audience. "This is about cultural change, about recognizing that threats to freedom don't always come in uniforms or foreign accents. Sometimes they wear gardening gloves and hold clipboard violations." The auditorium erupted in applause. Sloan wasn't just informing, she was inspiring. Then came the moment that showed us this transformation wasn't isolated. A call came from the Pentagon. They wanted Sloan to brief top defense officials on how domestic harassment threats could destabilize communities and undermine national unity. I watched my wife walk into that room with her laptop, her ribbons gleaming, and I knew she was carrying every family in Willowbrook with her. That same week, the Justice Department launched its first national task force under the Winslow Protocol. 7 federal offices, dozens of agents, and over 20 active investigations targeting HOA-linked harassment campaigns across America. Sloan had planted a seed that had become a national movement. We even began receiving letters from teachers, from veterans, from single mums in small towns. One stood out, a handwritten note from a young girl in Iowa. "Dear Commander Winslow, my mom says you're like a superhero. She told me how you helped stop the bad lady and made the neighborhood better. When I grow up, I want to be strong like you." Sloan cried when she read that one. We both did. Of course, not everything changed overnight. There were still obstacles, lawsuits, bureaucracy, critics who thought Sloan had overstepped or that we had embarrassed our town. But they couldn't stop what had begun, because every time someone spoke out, there were 5 others who stood up beside them. 6 months later, Cheryl Dunning filed an appeal. Her attorneys argued the arrest had been too theatrical, the prosecution too aggressive, but the appeals court unanimously upheld the conviction. Given the overwhelming evidence, the strategic planning of the defendants, and the national impact of their actions, the opinion read, "The sentence not only fits the crime, it reflects its magnitude." That same month, we were invited to Washington. Cameron gave a speech at the Civil Rights Summit titled "Courage in the Cul-de-sac." He spoke about justice, resilience, and how his family had turned fear into strength. I watched from the front row, tears in my eyes, as senators gave our son a standing ovation, and then Sloan stepped on stage. She didn't speak long, just enough to say, "We were never looking to be heroes. We just wanted peace. But when peace is threatened, military families don't back down. We hold the line." It became a rallying cry. Soon, city councils across the U.S. began adopting their own versions of the Winslow Protocol. Community watch groups started documenting HOA overreach and demanding transparency. Congressional hearings were held. Even federal grant programs emerged to fund civil rights education in suburban districts. The transformation was seismic. And amid all of it, life slowly returned to normal for us, or a new version of normal. The Hendersons turned Cheryl's old house into a bright, welcoming home. Children played outside freely. Barbecues, school events, and block parties became regular again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, I stood next to Sloan on our back deck. The air was warm, the laughter of neighbors echoing round us. "Do you ever think about how it all began?" I asked. "All the time," she replied. "It started with one violation notice, one threat, one family saying no more." I nodded. "And look where we are now." She turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "Justice isn't just what the courts decide, it's what communities build when they stop being afraid." We stood there for a long time, watching the neighborhood we'd reclaimed not just survive, but thrive. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a movement,